Welcome to my channel, The Magic of Java. This is an extract from my first book, The Green Queen from Java. It's a novel, it's a tale, a yarn intended to entertain you. Yes, it does reflect my experience of falling in love with Indonesia, my experience of falling in love with an Indonesian lady, and my increasing awareness of the paranormal and black magic. Or some might like to say my descent into madness, but it is just a novel. Any resemblance to real people is completely unintentional. Yes, it's based on my experience, so yes, it's based on people I've met and know, but amalgams or caricatures of them. I do mention real people and real life celebrities and hope that they, along with anybody who believes they've identified themselves, will forgive me. I have been at pains to suggest my knowledge or beliefs and what I have called powers are undeveloped, so what I will now share with you is more conjecture than the events I have already shared. But surely there is something to interpret from my experience other than the possibility that I'm going mad, a point not lost on my schizophrenic son. In fact, it is entirely possible that everything I have described is simply within my mind, not outside forces, and the common experience across my family is due to autosuggestion. Certainly collective trances are common in Indonesia, with autosuggestion being the Western science-based explanation. But whilst this may seem the most logical to those in the West, as someone who has experienced these events, it seems more preposterous than the paranormal explanations, albeit that I believe all are part of the collective unconscious. Although, of course, Western science might explain most of my experiences, but not all. Indeed, we may wish to describe such intellectualizing of events as madness. At least in the West, these are things that set us apart from the collective consciousness. Even in Indonesia, to talk about them, as I have, is considered foolhardy, possibly a madness in straying from the collective silence. Points not lost on Jung in his Red Book. But do I not belong to the dead? I live in the light of a day. Why should I torment myself here with Salome? Do I not have enough in my own life to deal with? Or as he commented later in life, I often had to cling on to the table so as not to fall apart. So am I slowly losing my mind or finding it? What I've tapped into, particularly with Kejawen, is not some alien set of beliefs and practices, but something I believe that was known throughout the world, or the collective unconscious, as Jung would call it. The use of black magic is still prevalent in many countries, but India, much of Africa, China and Indonesia have developed such things and held on to them. Martin claims that people in these places stumbled on this knowledge, but I believe this is a knowledge we all had and used at one time. The very best way to fight black magic is not to believe in it. Indeed, it is my experience that the effects of black magic are psychological, which can then manifest themselves in physical and mental health issues. So maybe our collective amnesia in the West is actually a powerful strategy whose reason is now lost and is simply amnesia. It is much better to visit the doctor and take Western medicines, which we believe in for rheumatism, hot flushes, etc., than it is to dwell on black magic possession and the symptoms. Although if somebody has a deep understanding of black magic and uses strong magic, it can affect a Western trained mind, as it did me. Because I had no belief in such things, I was also unaware of what was happening. And whilst it is more difficult to send magic to bullays, Our uncontrolled emotions and alcohol abuse present many opportunities for malevolence to take hold. Despite the conjectures I've expressed on mental health, it is better to put our faith in Western psychiatry than to seek alternative explanations I have proffered. But in doing so, we have lost any connection with our ancestors, their practices and belief, and turned death into a taboo, none of which can be a healthy way to organise our society. Indeed, to ignore death and leave it to medical professionals is a supreme act of selfishness and greed, and indicative of the inhumanity within society. Kejawen does not provide answers, but simply codifies so many of these old beliefs and practices. What is useful about Kejawen is that it does not challenge the unity of God, J. Gusti, known as Tahud, and distinguished from the polytheist Mushrik. It attempts to help us to become close to him or her. Although, as I have discovered, this is unnecessary. It is a complication which diverts us from really submitting to God's will, sujud, and becoming close. I am using the word God because one's religion or branch of religion, or even lack of it, is immaterial. There is no hierarchy of religion, only our intentions. Every individual's route to God is a personal route suited to their personality and experience, learning to accept their own limitations and challenges. Beware of confining yourself to a particular belief and denying all else, for much good will elude you. Indeed, the knowledge of reality would elude you. Being in yourself a matter for all forms of belief, for God is too vast and tremendous to be restricted to one belief or another. Ibn Arabi. The more circuitous we make our submission to God, the further we may move away from him or her. Politicians in many Muslim countries confuse Islam with authoritarianism, verging on fascism. So no wonder Westerners are confused. But do not confuse religion and unconditional love with the abuse of power, and do not use your faith for your own gain. It is better simply to submit and to thank God. Despite its often impenetrable, almost hermetic liturgy, Kejawen does provide 7 principles, sensanti, similar to commandments. 1. To always be kind towards others. 2. To teach the knowledge of goodness to those who are capable of comprehending it. To feed the hungry, to clothe those in need, and to provide shelter to those without. 3. To dwell in a mental state of bliss, sukha, and to maintain concentration, or remember ilang, and develop wisdom, waspada. To strive to attain the noble goal, Hamananyu, Hying, Banawawa, avoiding diversion of earthly concerns. To strive to subdue one's sensual desires, Panchahandrira. To establish a level of mental serenity, Henning or Samadhiya, so as to be able to attain enlightenment. And 7. To practice Samdhi. To restrain one's own emotions, ola rasa, and sensual desires, hawa nespu, in order to attain purity, kasushen. I wonder if all my experiences were sent to me so that I should learn to truly understand these principles, rather than pay lip service and allow earthly concerns to erode them, as I have in my life to date. Indeed, you could see the negative aspects of what we have experienced as being some form of punishment or trial for allowing myself to be so diverted, despite always believing that I was a good person. But don't we all? Probably are 7 realms, and I've only been exposed to 2, with necromancy seeming to link them. of which my knowledge is far from perfect. After all, Al-Quran mentions 7 heavens. But what I have learnt is don't meddle in what you don't understand. Don't even believe it a little, or simply have your doubts. By all means venerate your ancestors, but don't seek to use and abuse them, because this will become your fate. Whilst I may have inherited powers, or as I now prefer to say, knowledge or beliefs, some of which cannot be taught, although possibly can be developed by anyone, if you must use this, use it for good, and do not detach it from submission to God. Within these 7 realms are heaven and hell. Very few of us will experience heaven, and we all know hell, for we are already there. But of course, one man's heaven is another's hell. What really makes this hell is that we're removed from God and his unconditional love. We are removed from God by our own greed, and hell is a place where their religion is greed, much in the same way that Swedenborg observed. Sweden also talks of multiple Londons in the afterlife, with the differences between some versions sounding like the differences between Canada with its trust in fellow man and the US with its fear of fellow man. For heaven is within us all, and people who have heaven within them come into heaven. The heaven within us is our acknowledgement of the divine and our being led by the divine. Emanuel Swedenborg, Heaven and Hell. What we understand as reincarnation could be one of 2 things. The first, simply being returned to hell, or a parallel hell when we die, and the second, the dead possessing a living soul. It's possible, but I remain to be convinced that in these other realms we will find stranger creatures such as Naga. But what about unicorn and others from mythology? I am both unclear and unconvinced. Despite what seems as incredible, I have found my paranormal experiences to be very normal. In fact, I am more likely to believe in shape-shifting and that these are examples of ghosts simply taking other forms. After all, I am convinced that there is something within the legend of Neororokidal, who could be part mermaid, snake or naga. The most likely explanation is that the other realms contain the spirits of animals and plants. In fact, my experiences have been so normal to verge on the mundane, even familiar. As I have repeated, I have never been scared of what I have seen, always fascinated and anxious to see more. Fear lies in the unknown, and I am certain that fear breeds fear. My lessons have been to keep calm and reduce fear, even to temper all emotions. So maybe I would never see the most frightening aspects of the paranormal, but somehow I don't believe they exist outside of Cinetron and Hollywood. So where does that leave grey ladies, headless monks, vampires, werewolves, and any number of paranormal stories that some of us may believe? My experience is much more mundane. Ghosts may possess you because they're addicted to tobacco, gambling, alcohol, violence or drugs, because they have scores to settle, continue to experience what we would consider perverted or merely an addiction to bleep desires, simply because they are lonely, or somebody has sent them to you. Although I now suspect that even scent spirits normally only possess for one of the other reasons. What I am realising is that we must free ourselves from addictions and desires, certainly before we die. How can the heart travel to God when it is chained by desires? Ibn Arabi. But above all, the experience is very similar to what we already experience. After all, we all know hell. But what makes it hell is that the eternity you must spend smoking, drinking, or poking the vaginas of the living. I think, but cannot be certain, that good and evil are mere religious constructs which allow us to understand things better. Some New Age followers believe that the veneration of an entity creates an energy, so maybe it is that energy that I can feel in Nia or Akidal. This may also explain the seeming power of some Batu and Jimat, including my Chris. Logically, this should also apply to Allah, but more strongly. I used to think that the devil was also a construct, but now realise that any construct which is believed and venerated takes on its own reality and power. I am also aware that the more fanciful aspects of my experience, such as Nia or Akidal, could be more related to pre-Ambraharic religions or even prehistoric legends, which we have chosen to define as black magic. Indeed, if the power I have witnessed is based on the sum total of the belief or veneration in a construct or objects, then the Abrahamic God is the most powerful, only weakened by the divisions between Jews, Christians and Muslims, and within each religion itself. Whilst many Kejawens believe that all gods are one, J. Gosti. As we have sought relief across the whole of the island of Java, each of our helpers attempted to impress upon us their own interpretation of Islam, rather than seeing Islam as Islam and simply a different path to the Abrahamic God. But is this the belief in our own godlike nature that brings us closest to these constructs, which is the very reason to stay away from such thoughts? Even Omuni and Paerte are not evil. They're simply troubled and misguided in their lives and directed by possession. Undoubtedly, they simply mirror my own negative thoughts. There is no need to suppress such thoughts, but simply not to dwell on them. Better still to laugh at them. Paerte and Omuni need my compassion and support. The healthy man does not torture others. Generally, it is the tortured who turn into torturers. Carl Jung. The same is true of everything, including ghosts and jinn. They're not good and evil per se, just ghosts who do more good than bad, and others who do more bad than good. So using seemingly good ghosts for protection carries with it the danger that they may turn against you. Again, in Milton, a poem, Blake seems to have reached the same conclusions. My garment shall be woven of sighs and heart-broken lamentations. The misery of unhappy families shall be drawn out into its border. Wrought with the needle, with dire suffering, poverty, pain and woe, along the rocky island, and thence through the whole earth, there shall be the sick father and his starving family there, the prisoner in the stone dungeon and the slave of the mill. Ghosts do the bidding of the living. Is it possible that they are also commanded by other ghosts? Taking this argument to its conclusion, then a higher power must exist, be it human, ghost, jinn or the devil, directing the interactions between the realm of the living and the dead, possibly, albeit fleetingly, although I don't mean the ultimate power of God in this particular conjecture. But if we really do have free will, including possibly ghosts, hence my comments that they only do the bidding of the living when it suits them, this may be an internal struggle between the constructs we call good and evil, a never-ending struggle reflecting our own good and bad. I have been at pains to describe my revelations as personal revelations based on my knowledge, experience and values. So my focus on ghosts is because this is the easiest way for me to understand the revelations. Certainly I am aware that ghosts appear to be revealing things to me, not always directly, or in a way in which I comprehend. Maybe these are simply constructs codifying my newfound knowledge, or should I say, beliefs, and I am wrong that magic is reliant on ghosts and necromancy. I've asked many ghosts that have possessed us if they know they are already dead, and they have all said yes. None seem able to move towards the light, at least believe that their fate is to remain in the parallel world possessing the living, although most seem to want to be left alone to sleep in their graves. Whilst this is simply my experience, it does appear to contradict the received wisdom amongst Western spiritualists. However, if ghosts do have free will, as Maddie's mother comments about Jeff suggest, then maybe they are still capable of redemption and moving towards the light. Maybe this is Jeff's real challenge, to free himself from alcohol and join his mother, but there is nothing to guide him, so much to divert him, and even more when he was alive. Perhaps the most pernicious feelings we can live with are hatred, jealousy and greed. They're everywhere and destroying all that's good. If you are wrong, do not seek revenge, as it will cause even more harm. Forgiveness provides a much healthier basis to live our lives. Above all, remember the words of Uncle Norman. When we die, nothing matters at all, and everything matters. So when we meet God, what we have collected, especially money, or achieved on our lives, will not matter anymore, but God will consider all in determining our fates. Despite my criticism of some aspects of his regime, this was not lost on President Suharto. The ruler who acquires a lot of possessions will not be honoured after death. Thus do not mistreat the people. But as I have now discovered, and Martin has known for so long, this is how we should live our lives, and just maybe God will admit us into heaven. So it's not for me to judge Suharto. That is Allah's realm. I also remain convinced that most of what Suharto did, he did because he truly believed it was in Indonesia's best interest. You see, few of us commit acts which we ourselves believe to be wrong and evil, so no one can judge others, only individual actions. In Suharto's case, we cannot dismiss the role of MI6 in misinforming everyone about the true situation in Indonesia, precipitating acts I have judged to be wrong. Memories are strange things. What we believe to have seen, heard, touched, tasted, smelt, so often prove to be false, or at least unverifiable by employing the scientific method, no more so than the progression of events I have described to you. But what I have learned through these events is not to dismiss that which cannot be verified in a laboratory. I understand my memory and even my mind will sometimes have failed me, but I cannot in all consciousness dismiss these events altogether. At least to me, most are very real indeed, however incredulous they may seem to the scientifically trained mind. Fortunately, my conclusions are not unique, even to the scientist, as Young proposed in the Red Book. I have learnt that in addition to the spirit of this time, there is another spirit at work, namely that which rules the depths of everything contemporary. The spirit of time would like to hear of use and value. I also thought this way, but my humility still thinks this way. But the other spirits force me nevertheless to speak beyond justification, use and meaning, filled with human pride and blinded by the presumptuous spirit of the times. I have long sought to hold that other spirit away from me, but I do not consider that the spirit of the depths from time immaterial, and for all the future possesses a greater power than the spirit of time, who changes with the generations. The spirit of the depths has subjugated all pride and arrogance to the power of judgment. He took away my beliefs in science. He robbed me of the joy in explaining and ordering things, and he let me and he let me devotion to the dead of the time die out in me. He forced me down to the last and to the simplest things. Those Western scientists who have not described me as mad might argue that all my experiences and revelations are products of my unconscious mind. Logically, therefore, all entities I have mentioned, including religious, could be the product of the unconscious mind. This is where we begin to round the circle and move back towards feelings of being godlike, the left-hand path and heresy. I need to keep in mind that whilst Allah may reside in us all, none of us are Allah, or we would be omniscient. After all, we did not create the universe. God, there is no deity but Him, the alive, the eternal. Al-Quran 2:255, also known as Ayat al-Kursi. I'm somewhat reflective on my life throughout this story, and I've been pains to criticise wrongdoing, corruption and unethical business practices. But I now realise that when I started my business in the UK, I was no better. Of course, my wrongdoing is nothing compared to that I've experienced in Indonesia, but it is not for me to judge, even the severity, as that is Allah's prerogative. I spent the money on making a beautiful flat for my then partner, but we hadn't even finished when disaster struck, which was helped by the treachery of somebody I considered a friend, who poetically died young. My family lived in a building site for some 20 years, and the resultant stress probably broke our relationship and lost us most of our friends, which I refer to as the mess I made of my life in the UK. I now recall an anonymous letter to me with an article about how seeking revenge harms the individual. Was this really the beginning of my negative attitudes and bad luck? Whilst I never entered a pact with Nira Blanc, it remains that no good will come from money that has not been earned honestly, including if we sell our home to Muni, whose money is tainted with blood, including that of my own brother-in-law, Mas Conchara. Then there is another parallel with my life in the UK. My former partner was an artist and perfectionist, decorating our flat beautifully and causing our neighbours to become jealous, even describing her as the Queen. So similar to what has happened in Indonesia. And we now have two homes, and Maddie is unhappy in both, making her neighbours jealous with her nesting instincts. A priori aloftness being respected by most, but despised by a few, and despite being absolutely natural to her. Maybe this is my biggest challenge, which I must resist addressing right now. Finally, there are the godlike actions which we unwittingly made, feeding the malevolence. How can I judge others when my own belief system is so flawed? Although I find myself unable to comprehend the motivation of our adversaries, I am also reminded when I have acted out of incomprehensible jealousy. When I first became an academic, I somehow convinced myself that my career would be enhanced by chipping away at another's. This person had shown me nothing but kindness, and my beliefs were completely unfounded. I now find my thoughts and actions incomprehensible and deeply regret them. It is no defence, but my attitudes had been copied from others around me. In fact, I remember meeting a former teacher who was intensely jealous that I had applied for a master's degree. This really shocked me. as then I believed, teach us to be above such feelings. I'm also aware that some think that when a non-believer finds God, they will be tested. Was this all my test? Was I really that bad to deserve such a test? I've gone to great lengths to suggest there is no good or evil per se, only better or worse. What made me act in ways that I now repent? Well, it's about our beliefs. We all believe that we're basically good, because our belief system tells us that we are. Remember Professor Darwin's words on Fat Lion? Even these belief systems are not evil per se, but can result in acts which others would describe as evil. However, just as there is a scale between better and worse, then some belief systems are closer to bad than others. And the brand of authoritarianism mixed with social Darwinism, still inculcated in Indonesia's schools, is particularly pernicious. Is it this mix that has created the dreadful deceit that all bullies are super rich and that the West had stolen Indonesia's wealth? A belief which permeates every aspect of Indonesia's business, social and personal life. Lies, I have come to realise, are the worst sin in the afterlife, just as murder is in this. But then a whole country is organised around an untruth. What hope is there for its citizens when they die? What we have learned after 8 months of torment, anxiety, fear, and not an inconsiderable amount of money. For we are back where we started, knowing that it is better not to believe in black magic, not to use dukkha, and simply to strive to be good. My moral compass has been reset from left-leaning Unitarianism to one with more compassion and less certainty. But we are better people for sure. We love each other more than I thought possible. All along, Uncle Norman has been my guide on a journey he must have already taken as he rose through the Masons. My daily life is now dominated by my obligations to pray 5 times a day and my preoccupation with black magic. But despite this, I am still a bully. Not a week passes without an Indonesian, upon seeing me, believing that their prayers have been answered and they have been sent a millionaire to cheat. They will always believe that I still have all my wealth and will never see through their particular ruse. After all, not only are all Westerners dollar millionaires, they are also stupid and have no paranormal powers. Although on reflection, when I first moved to my home in South Jakarta, I probably was a dollar millionaire with no paranormal powers, but I refuse to believe I was that stupid. Gullible, maybe. It is the 5 years of torment that have reduced me to comparative poverty. Yes, I've been on an incredible journey to which I feel privileged to have experienced, but I would not want to wish its darker aspects onto anyone. Holding on to these thoughts is important to keeping me grounded. Yes, I have experienced revelations, but they are simply revelations on my own personal journey to understanding God, nothing more profound than this. I do not have a duty to share these thoughts with anyone. I only do so through my Western vice and lack of inner control and a desire to remain grounded. Maybe I now understand what is happening and could provide an explanation which lies between those of the Western science and Indonesian mysticism. Uni placed something in our home long before we moved in, possibly just the tree, that allows him to focus his energies on our home, because he believed it allowed him to. When we moved in, we were unaware of it, largely because we didn't believe it, but also because such negative energies feed off our own negative thoughts, which we hardly had. After all, most commentators on such issues say that black magic cannot harm the good. I believe this to be an oversimplification, as it's not just our actions, but more importantly, our thoughts, our own negative energy. We only became aware of such negativity when Buddha pointed it out to us. And of course, Omyuni's determination to feed our paranoia only confirmed our suspicions. The various jimat and wafak we have around the home only work by allowing us to focus our positive energies. We don't need them, but we do need to get back to being positive. Maddie hardly has a bad thought in her head, apart from illogical and rampant jealousy, and this is what the malevolence feeds off, making me angry with her thoughts. Maddie's daughters are much like her mother. Titi has a few bad thoughts, but does suffer from low confidence. With Dati, it's a useful descriptions in terms of the point I make, but it would be unkind to say that Dati doesn't have a thought in her head. So is it in all the mind? It's all in the mind? Well, yes, it is. But we can feel what I have called energy from others in a way that science is yet to understand. Although medical science has begun to understand the benefits of meditation in the treatment of diseases such as cancer, it is yet to recognise that there is also a causal effect. So what is this energy? I honestly don't know. But for sure it exists. Some describe it as like low-level magnetic energy or Hertzian waves, which would support my view on micro blood circulation and the health benefits of magnets. But Rupert Sheldrake argues that we have indications of the existence of this energy that are scientifically verifiable, such as people knowing when others are looking at them, even though their back is turned, household pets knowing when their owners are coming home, and cats in particular knowing when they're being taken to the vets. Long after writing this, I became convinced that this is the dark energy physicists have discovered in dark matter, and if I am correct, the circle is squared, uniting black magic with physics via dark energy. There also exists a collective unconsciousness that we can tap into. When this results in negative thoughts, it affects our micro blood circulation and it results in unidentifiable medical conditions. This collective consciousness, while collective, is interpreted by our own individual consciousness, and therefore we process information according to our experience and beliefs, which cannot be currently explained by science, but some of its effects can be measured and patterns discerned. This is why when I've spoken with ghosts, this is why I've seen and spoken with ghosts, whilst others experience different archetypes when faced with the same events. So whilst I have felt the negativity in my own mind that is making me physically ill, the stress of knowing that somebody is trying to kill me, affecting my micro blood circulation. These are at the boundaries of Western science, but do not run counter to it, simply alongside it. Such is the theory of morphogenic fields by Sheldrake. Of course, religion and spirituality can help. They're designed to do exactly this, fill in the gap where science ends, but you must truly believe in them. To think that all of my life I've thought positive thinking to be psychobabble, well, it's not. It's a powerful survival technique. Although, of course, there are many explanations, and mine is simply an attempt to find a compromise between my Western education and my paranormal experiences in Indonesia. Was it all about bad luck? If you remember, I kept making costly mistakes when using the internet. Is it possible that at critical times I am making errors of judgment, doing and saying the most inappropriate things? After all, creating a cycle of stress and mistakes at critical moments could have a profound effect on one's life. It is a useful explanation, but there has been so much bad luck, I simply do not have explanations for it. Psychologists would rightly suggest that this is simply a pessimistic interpretation of normal events. but there has been just so much misfortune. Western science would atomise my experience and maybe could explain 80% by hypnosis, mass hysteria, autosuggestion and stress. Even some of the deaths can be explained as simple murder, the victims, including Mas Kunchara, having been given poisoned food prepared by our neighbours. Those that could not be explained would need to be repeated in a laboratory, but of course could not be, or they would be science and not dark arts. Rightly, science atomises these experiences, but in doing so we lose their context, meaning and significance. However, if we focus on the 20% which is unexplained, we're in danger of allowing our minds to start seeing black magic as explaining more than 20%. In other words, succumbing to our own fears. No, it is better not to dwell on that which cannot be explained. When men cease to believe in God, they do not believe in nothing. They will believe in anything. G.K. Chesterton. What of my other divination that somebody would die? Was it Mass Predictor's mother? Somehow I don't think so. After she was old, and like Mas Kunchara and Buddha, susceptible to such thinking. We all die at some point, but Pa and Ibuerte will die young from their misgiving, as maybe so will Maddie and I from their misdoing. Whilst Kejawen tradition has it that Uni will either lose all his money or have to give up something important like a loved one. Certainly when Maddie visited his home, she could smell death, a sure sign that blood is now required. But of course it will be mundane and appear natural, and nobody will suspect anything else, because I now know that's how black magic works. Of course Uni and Pa Erte are consumed by jealousy and greed. Of course they will die young, and before they do so they will never be happy, because they can never have enough money. There will always be someone richer than them. In many respects they represent the misuse of Javanese traditions by Suharto, superimposing the most draconian means, rampant crony capitalism, on a society that was already deeply class-ridden and repressed by their own superstitions. Psychologically, social Darwinism was grafted onto a semi-feudal system whose development had been arrested by Dutch mercantilism. So why does Uni and Pa Erte send suffering to their neighbours? Why did Tony Blair and George W. Bush, or was the Dalang, the Wayang puppet master, really Dick Cheney or even Lynn, invade Iraq? Why did the banks come close to destroying capitalism? Why did the EU destroy the Greek economy? It's not because they are evil, but simply because they can, and maybe even frightened of their own power. Even if there is any truth in the rumours about George W. Bush, his maternal grandmother, and he believed that he was hastening the apocalypse, it adds, not detracts from my argument. You see, we allow the inner selfishness in others to rule us, based on their own fears of other leaders, as they fully understand the dirty tricks and inhumanity required to climb the greasy pole. Panjak Pinang is a game where young men climb up a grease pole to collect prizes. It is thought to have been introduced by the Dutch, but is now played ironically to celebrate Indonesia's independence. Give anyone power, and unchecked they will have godlike thoughts, which are addictive, and ultimately they will take the decisions which appear evil to the rest of us. Yes, it really is that simple. And there they all are, in Ev's parlour in Kensington, the dead and the living, Pa and Ibuerte, Uni and Baani, Widiati's dad, Professor Darwin and his associates, the driver who got us lost, the electrician, the driver who ran over me, the swimming instructor, the Eagles, Front Prembella Islam, the Preman of Gun and Keedle, the ponytailed sarong wearers of Ubud, the expats from Sama-Sama Bar, the population of Tangerang Banten, the Indonesian Immigration Department, Sir Alex Ferguson, the call centres of India, President Suharto and his family, including his son-in-law, Pri Pamawa, Pa Ustad from Banten, Billy the Budgie, and the Luftwaffe Ordnance, drinking tea from Staffordshire Bone, China, and asking the nice Mr. Epstein, "How's your mother, Queenie?" Well, that concludes my first book, The Green Queen from Java. By all means, feel free to comment on it, to criticise it. In fact, that's the only way I can improve it. I said to you that I would be updating new chapters once a week, and I think I've managed to do that throughout. But I'm going to take a little time off before I start uploading my next book, Magic Sugar from Java. So if you want to know when the new book comes online, the best way to do that is to to subscribe to my channel, but I've just found out that you actually have to hit the bell as well, but that way you will find out when I add new content onto my channel. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you so much for enjoying me. It's been a pleasure to have you with me once again. Thank you.